Well, welcome back to Bible class. Glad that you're with us again for another opportunity to study God's Word. We're looking at the book of Second. I know I was going to do that at some point. First Thessalonians chapter 2, verses 7 through 12, and then we'll look at verses 13 through 20 on Wednesday. And so we're going to start with verse 7 here of First Thessalonians 2, where Paul writes, "But we were gentle among you, just as a nursing mother cherishes her own children." That word gentle, you can substitute with words like warm, meek, humble. The idea of a nurse is like we read in the New King James, the nursing mother. These individuals, Paul, Silas, Timothy, they loved and cared deeply for the Thessalonians, and there's no mistaking that love and devotion that they had for these brethren. Just like you and I can see out in the congregation that we attend, there should be no mistaken, there should be no mistake in looking at how people treat one another. It shouldn't be a happy accident that people are good, godly people. It should be evident, should be showcased. Now, verse 8 says, "So affectionately longing for you, we were well pleased to impart to you not only the gospel of God, but also our own lives, because you had become dear to us." Paul's not a mere hireling. You look at John 10, 12, and 13, and it says, "But a hireling, he who is not the shepherd, one who does not own the sheep, sees the wolf coming and leaves the sheep and flees. And the wolf catches the sheep and scatters them." Verse 13 says, "The hireling flees because he is a hireling and does not care about the sheep." But we talked about in verse 7 that Paul, Silas, and Timothy, they cared deeply about the flock at Thessalonica. They imparted God and all of themselves. And in the local congregation, we need to take time to know the brethren. Now, we have to be in the lives of the young people. We may not always be able to do this perfectly. I know I don't do it perfectly, but we can always strive to show the love for the flock like we find Paul, Silas, and Timothy did. And that's the point. That's the purpose of all of this. As talking about caring and nurturing a congregation and being there for a congregation, it's this mentality of showcasing love. Verse 9 says, "For you remember, brethren, our labor and toil, for laboring night and day, that we might be a burden to any of you. We preached to you the gospel of God." We're still in the context of a mother who nurses children, and there's this great pain, a hard and exhausting labor, laboring day and night. You think about being a new parent, as Megan and I have been new parents before, and you experience the up down routine, right, at night. And even now, with Adam being only just a little over 3 years old by a few weeks, we're still in the up down routine where we're getting up and telling him, get back down. And you have this all night, all day thing going on, raising children and caring for them and taking care of them. And then you stop and think about how the church works and how the church is expected to function. Does church work end for a preacher at 5 p.m.? What if his hours are 8 to 4? Does it end at 4 p.m.? Does after 4 p.m. the work of a minister stop? No. There are many times where ministers are working at odd hours of the day and odd hours of the night, and we're trying to do everything we can. But, it's not just ministers, it's Christians in general. We're all working at odd hours. If there's a funeral that we go and attend, what if it's at 8 p.m.? There have been some funerals that are later in the evening than normal, and you go to one of those funerals, and what are you doing? Well, you're being a Christian. You're ministering to that family who has suffered and lost a loved one. You don't clock out as a Christian. You don't clock out as a minister. There are times where you have to labor day and night. Now, he says we would not be chargeable unto any of you. Really, in the New King James, it says we wouldn't be a burden to any of you. But 1 Thessalonians 2:6 says, "Nor did we seek glory from men, either from you or from others, when we might have made demands as apostles of Christ." They didn't charge these brethren. They didn't ask for payment from them. Not because they couldn't. We talked about that in verse 6. There's nothing wrong with getting payment for what they did, but they chose not to. They made sure that they were grounded in the faith, and they preached to them the gospel of God. That's what they were setting out to do, and they did it. Verse 10 says, "You are witnesses, and God also, how devoutly and justly and blamelessly we behaved ourselves among you who believe." God and these Christians are witnesses to how Paul carried himself. 1 Thessalonians 2:5 says, "Neither at any time do we use flattering words, as you know, nor a cloak of covetousness. God is witness." And he says it was justly. You remember Micah 6 and verse 8 where it says, he has shown you, O man, what is good, and what does the Lord require of you but to do justly, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with your God, blamelessly. This is more along the lines of the person and integrity and character. Doesn't mean people never criticize. Paul had a lot of criticisms that were leveled against him and a lot of criticizers. But it means the accusations are groundless. You can criticize and accuse someone all day long, but if they're groundless and if they're baseless, then it doesn't matter what accusations are leveled against them. The facts are the facts, and the facts have to be borne out. He talks about behaving and this idea of acting correctly. And we're never expected to grow out of proper behavior. We're always expected to be good, godly people, no matter our age, no matter our position, no matter the circumstance. We have to rise above the others of this world. Let's close out with the last two verses here, verses 11 and 12. As you know how we exhorted and comforted and charged every one of you as a father does his own children. Paul's talked for the last few verses about being like a mother, and now he's changing over to being like a father. Mothers, would typically be a nurturer, and fathers are generally the corrector. They try to guide the children, not that mothers don't do this or that fathers aren't nurturers themselves, but typically the role of it is the father guides the child. We're told that fathers are asked to provoke not their children to wrath. And so the disciplinarian, the father who is training that child on how to be a good citizen or a good Christian or however you want to phrase it, he's shifting to that type of mentality and language now. And notice what he says in verse 12, that you would walk worthy of God who calls you into his own kingdom and glory. That idea worthy there has to do with value. Does my walk with God have value? Am I valuable to God? Not that as God valuable, am I valuable to God in the sense that he's going to give me an opportunity to be saved, but is my walk of value to God? Isaiah 59, 1 and 2 tells us that when we sin, when we habitually break the covenant that we have with God, he separates himself from us. We're of no value in that situation. And so he removes himself from us, and we've removed ourselves from him ultimately. But that's the idea. Do I obey God? Is following God a lifestyle, or is it a hobby? I have a lot of hobbies. I have a lot of fun hobbies that I enjoy, hobbies that you probably enjoy as well in certain situations and circumstances. And yet my lifestyle is different from my hobby. I'm a Christian. That's not a hobby. That should be my lifestyle. Ephesians 4:1, Colossians 1:10 also talk about walking worthy of the vocation we're called, Ephesians 4:1, and worthy of the Lord, pleasing him, Colossians 1:10. The church is the called out, and we've been tasked with being different from this life, to not be like the world. Romans 12:1 and 2. I beseech you, therefore, brethren, by the mercies of God, that you present your bodies a living sacrifice, holy, acceptable to God, which is your reasonable service. And do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, that you may prove what is that good and acceptable and perfect will of God. We have to be the called out, be different people. Now, next week, we're going to, it's still this week, but Wednesday, we're going to pick up in 1 Thessalonians chapter 2 and verse 13. But I want to thank you for studying with us, and Lord willing, we'll see you then.